Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, the Toronto Maple Leafs have acquired Ryan O'Reilly and Noel Acciari, a prospect as well, in exchange for a first, a second, a third, and a fourth round pick. Adam Gaudette and Mikhail Abramov also going the other way in a massive 9-piece trade. So let's break it all down. Starting with the 32-year-old Ryan O'Reilly, because he's obviously the main piece of this trade, it's clear that the former Stanley Cup champion, Conn Smythe winner, and Selke Trophy winner is having a down season with just 19 points in 40 games. It's probably the worst year of his career. If we're looking at his evolving hockey player card over the last 3 seasons, it paints the picture of one of the better two-way center icemen in the entire NHL. But if we're looking at just the numbers from this season, he's probably having the worst season of his career. And the optics around spending premium assets on a guy who's having the worst season of his career aren't necessarily the greatest. But if we take a look at some of the micro stats on his Andy and Rono player card from this season, it paints a bit of a different picture and contextualizes some of those surface numbers that we were looking at previously. Because, yes, he still is having a down season, but so are the St. Louis Blues as a team. They're kind of awful. And if we're looking at the micro stats for Ryan O'Reilly here, he still is generating a ton of scoring opportunities that the Blues just haven't been able to take advantage of, opportunities that his teammates just haven't been able to pay him back for. So the 19 points in the 40 games don't really worry me too much because he still is generating a ton of offense in terms of high danger opportunities with his shot and his creative playmaking ability. And he still is that responsible forward that can get the puck out of your own zone. And he does all of that while playing up against all of the other team's best players. If we're looking at St. Louis's numbers, both with and without Ryan O'Reilly on the ice, offensively and defensively at 5-on-5, we could see the Blues were a much more productive team offensively with him out there than when he wasn't. So again, if you're worried about the 19 points in just 40 games, I would say that was more of a case of the Blues just not being able to take advantage of the opportunities that he was creating, and then his teammates just not being able to reciprocate that. And then if we're looking at the numbers and the results defensively, they were about even. But again, you have to remember that Ryan O'Reilly plays the majority of his minutes up against the other team's best players night in and night out. You know, if you're looking at the results without him out there, well, those were his teammates playing up against the other team's second, third, and fourth lines. It's just not the same quality of minutes. Don't get me wrong, it was an absolutely brutal couple of months to start this season for O'Reilly, and then he broke his foot in the month of December, and he's only played 3 games since coming back from that injury, but in those 3 games, he's got 2 goals and 3 points, and he's looking a lot more like his former self. And because he's coming back from that injury, a lot of people have compared this trade to the Nick Foligno trade from a couple of seasons ago, where Foligno was dealing with a back injury previously to the Maple Leafs acquiring him. They cleared him of it. They spent a lot of assets on him. And then the injury re-aggravated itself going into the playoffs, and then he wasn't able to play. And then he just walked in free agency, just like Ryan O'Reilly could this summer. I'm not going to say people are wrong for making that comparison. You know, I understand where that anxiety is coming from, but I also don't think that Ryan O'Reilly's broken foot is the same as whatever was wrong with Nick Foligno's back. You know, broken bones have set timetables. O'Reilly was out for 6 weeks, and these guys have access to medical technology that you and I will just never see in our lifetimes. You know, there was a scene in the Amazon All or Nothing series where Wayne Simmons had broken a bone in his hand and he had some kind of weird contraption on their post game, and it was a bone regrowth stimulator machine. I'm not a doctor, but I'm also not worried about this foot injury being a problem moving forward. We'll take a look at what the Maple Leaf lineup could look like in a minute, but first, the Maple Leafs also got Noel Acciari in this trade as well, a player that we talked about in a previous video. A former 20-goal scorer that can play both the center ice position and on the wing. He's on pace for 15 goals this year. He blocks a lot of shots, he throws a lot of hits, and he's a very effective penalty killer. Again, I can understand why a guy like Noel Acciari is being overlooked when Ryan O'Reilly is in the trade, But this is not a player to sneeze at. He's a guy that you're going to notice when he's out there because he's blocking shots and throwing hits, but he's a player that you're going to appreciate because he is that dogged penalty killer that can also pitch in some goals at 5-on-5. I've shown this tweet from Active Stick before, but I'll show it again here because since 2018-2019, the Maple Leafs have played in 8 series clinching games, and they're 0 for 17 on the power play in those games, and they've lost 5 of them by just 1 goal. And the argument that I've been making here on the channel for the last couple of months is it would be really nice to see the Maple Leafs add another scoring forward. And the opposing argument to that is, well, if you lost those games by 1 goal, couldn't you also prevent one more from happening and you maybe could have won those games? And I think Ryan O'Reilly is a fair compromise to that argument. He's a dominant two-way center iceman who's having a down year, yes, but if you dive a little bit deeper into the numbers, he's still a very, very effective player who, again, plays all of his minutes, a ridiculous amount of them, up against all the other team's best players. He doesn't necessarily need to do that here on the Maple Leafs. He's got John Tavares and Austin Matthews in front of him. If you're looking at where Ryan O'Reilly can fit into this lineup, there's just so much depth now, and there's so many options, and I don't think any of them are wrong. Because if they decide to go with the 3 centers down the middle, that's pretty damn good. And if they decide to move one of them to the wing, maybe it's John Tavares, because the merits of moving him to the wing have been discussed in the past. You take some of that defensive responsibility away from him and you free him up to just score goals, and that would be pretty cool. I mean, that looks pretty good. And in the past, the Maple Leafs have liked to load up that top line in the playoffs with over $30 million in forwards, but that's kind of left William Nylander on a bit of an island in previous seasons where he doesn't really have much to work with and there's not much depth behind it. So when those guys aren't on the ice, there's not much there. But now with Ryan O'Reilly, you could throw over the boards a second line of Bunting, O'Reilly, and Nylander, and you can kind of rotate those 2 lines if you really needed a goal late in the game. But if they did decide to roll with the 3 center icemen, and you're looking at this left side, there still is room for improvement there. There is. And the fact that they got Ryan O'Reilly at 75% salary retained means that it still is an option. You could move a guy like Kerfoot in a deal and you get salary retained in that trade and you can make a lot of things work. But asset wise, they've already spent a first, a second, a third, and a fourth. I guess they're kind of all in. What's another couple of prospects? Maybe not the top end guys available in their system, but maybe a couple like B plus guys or whatever. I'd be open to that. Defensively, that's another conversation. That's a topic for another video that we will do in the coming days or so. But I'm really liking what I'm seeing right now. And John Shannon is saying that Ryan O'Reilly hopes to be in Toronto in time tonight, I guess, to play on Hockey Night in Canada against the Montreal Canadiens. A little bit of a different story with Noel Acciari because he requires a work visa, but hopefully things can get sorted out and we get to see these guys tonight in the blue and white. Every time I looked at what the Maple Leafs could acquire at this year's deadline, I always landed on them needing another centerman. Pontus Holmberg, David Kampf, and Alex Kerfoot rotating between those bottom 2 center ice positions, just it wasn't good enough in my mind. You look at the Tampa Bay Lightning and what they were able to accomplish when they won their first Stanley Cup. They did that the majority of the time without Steven Stamkos. We've seen the Toronto Maple Leafs play without Austin Matthews this season, and that wasn't a very fun team to watch. Not very many teams can sustain injuries like that, but having Ryan O'Reilly there, having the quality of player that he is, having the centerman, how good he is there, it's just extra insurance. And I think that's way more support and way more depth than they would have gotten from acquiring a winger or any other player out there. Would they have been better off maybe spending those assets on somebody who was signed longer than just this season? I mean, maybe, but if you wanted the center iceman and one as good as Ryan O'Reilly, I don't think that there was one available that had term remaining on their contract. So they went out and got the best one that they could. And maybe some people will make the argument, if you were going to trade for a center, why wouldn't you have just gone out and gotten Bo Horvat instead? A guy who hasn't been injured this year and is also having a career season. And to that, I would say, maybe, but at the same time, that was also almost 3 weeks ago. And your trade plans are fluid as you move closer to the deadline. There was talks of the Maple Leafs potentially acquiring a forward or a defenseman, maybe even both. Were they all in necessarily? Were they comfortable moving that first round pick or a top prospect? Um, Maybe the answer was no then, and now it was. But I would also say that the Islanders gave up more in this trade. That first round pick that they gave up is probably going to be like 10 or 15 spots higher than what the pick that the Leafs gave up to the Blues. And I think when we eventually see what the San Jose Sharks end up getting in return for Timo Meyer, or even what the Arizona Coyotes may get for Jacob Chekrin, who knows if he ever gets traded, I think it'll end up being considerably more than what the Maple Leafs paid to acquire O'Reilly. And Patrick Kane could have been an interesting option. There were some other players as well, like Tyler Bertuzzi, but again, those guys were wingers and also UFAs. I would have preferred to have acquired the centerman in O'Reilly. Now, just some more housekeeping stuff to look after, because the Maple Leafs did place Matt Murray on LTIR in order to make the money work with this trade. But I don't know if they're placing him on LTIR today or if they're placing him on LTIR retroactive to when he was first hurt, because he was skating today. I mean, when we saw him skating on the ice this morning, it was expected that he would be out for like another week or two or whatever. And if it was retroactive to when he first got hurt, he'd be able to come back in another week or two. But if it isn't, and they're placing him on LTIR just freshly today, he'd have to remain there for 24 days and 10 more games. And this doesn't look like a guy who's going to miss 10 more games. It's a minor detail, but it's one that we don't have clarification on right now. Because if we're looking at the money situation, they sent Holmberg and Simmons down because those are two guys that didn't require waivers, and they could have sent Anderson down, but then he would need to pass through waivers. Maybe he gets claimed. They can't send Joseph Wool down until Matt Murray comes back. So by placing him on LTIR retroactively, it just allows them to gain access to some more cap space to make that trade. And then when Matt Murray does come back off of LTIR, they can just send Joseph Wool down and the money situation will resolve itself. If you're looking at the value of this trade overall, they get back Noel Acciari and a prospect as well. They give up a third and a fourth round pick. You can call those things kind of a wash. So if you look at it as they spent a first and a second on Ryan O'Reilly, I think you'd take that gamble because he's just an awesome, awesome player. And it gives them so much depth. It gives them so many different options. And I have no doubt that playing on a better team in a bit of a lesser role, behind Austin Matthews and John Tavares, or even with those guys, that Ryan O'Reilly can be the player that he was just last season. There's still a lot of positive signs that point to him being a very productive player, including the fact that he plays all of his minutes against the other team's best players and he still generates an absurd amount of scoring opportunities. If you pair him with somebody who could set him up or pair him with somebody that he can set up, there's going to be a lot of goals that happen out there. And for people who maybe wanted to see the Maple Leafs improve defensively, like we mentioned before, I think that this is a bit of a compromise because Ryan O'Reilly is a very effective, awesome two-way player. He's going to give you some offense and he's going to give you some defense as well. And I think a lot of people look at defense just coming from the blue line, but I think it's more of a team concept. And I think that's how the Maple Leafs have improved their play defensively this year, by playing better as a team overall. And I think Ryan O'Reilly is only going to add to that. Noel Acciari as well. Mikhail Abramov and Adam Gaudette aren't nothing pieces in this trade, but at the same time, Abramov, an older prospect, kind of falling down the depth chart, and Gaudette was having a nice season with the Marlies, but beyond that, I don't know if his skating would have translated to the NHL level very well. I think they're more so just in this trade to balance out the contracts. The Maple Leafs remaining still at 49 out of 50 contracts in the organization, so they still do have a slot to add somebody else or sign Matthew Nyes when his college season is done. The Maple Leafs are a top 5 team in the NHL, and they've accomplished that having used their fourth string goalie for 14 games so far this season. They've used 12 different defensemen, and Matthews has been managing an injury pretty much all season long, but he's had 3 weeks off, and now he's back, and he looked, I know it was against the Blackhawks, but he looked really, really damn good in that game. And Morgan Riley also hasn't looked so great for the first half of the year, but he's been better the last 3 or 4 weeks. And now they add Ryan O'Reilly to this team. Is it going to be enough to get past Tampa Bay? Is it going to be enough to get past Boston? Is it going to be enough to get past both of them in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs? Because that's what they're more than likely going to have to do. I don't know. We're going to have to wait and find out. But that's a conversation for another day and another video. So make sure to like the video if you did like it, and subscribe for more, because more is always on the way. And guys, I'll see you again in the next one.